Hey everyone! Tonight, we're diving into the fascinating world of ancient Egyptian concubines, women who shared a king's bed, often waited years just for a glance, and became masters of charm, while also learning how to avoid being poisoned. Before we settle in, please hit the like button and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of content. And drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the range of time zones. Some of you might even be cozy under a blanket with a cup of tea. Now, let's dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some background calm, and begin tonight's journey together. The sun rises over the Nile. Birds are chirping. The palace is coming to life. And just as your dream hits its dramatic peak, maybe something about a handsome scribe and a mountain of figs, you're gently nudged awake by a servant who, far too cheerfully, tells you that you look a little puffy today. Welcome to your new normal as a royal Egyptian concubine. There's no sleeping in. The pharaoh might come today. Then again, he might not come for weeks or ever. But that doesn't matter. You're considered a valuable ornament of the state, and your mornings now belong to the department of looking perfect. You're lifted from your stiff but stylish linen sheets and handed a bronze mirror, not to flatter you, but to assess you. How's your skin? Any stray eyebrow hairs? Have your lips lost that smooth lotus petal look? These aren't just idle questions. Your future could depend on whether you look slightly better than the girl snoring beside you. Next, you stretch, not to get fit, but to improve posture. A bad back leads to bad angles, and bad angles mean you're forgotten. You pace the room for 10 minutes, balancing a bowl of scented water on your head, smiling like you enjoy it. Breakfast arrives, a small plate of dates, a couple of figs, and maybe one carefully halved pomegranate seed for portion control, of course. You chew slowly because nothing kills a lure faster than looking hungry. All around you, other women, stops, are doing the same. Eating in silence, engaging in a wordless competition called who can blink less while pretending not to compete. A servant returns and offers a compress for your under eyes. Translation: you look like the pharaoh prefers someone who plays the harp. You nod and accept. The cloth smells like lavender and ambition, and so your day begins. Not with drama or glory, but with small, calculated routines designed to make you look effortlessly divine. You haven't spoken yet. You haven't left the room. But you've already fought your first battle, waking up and pretending you haven't aged overnight. And guess what? You'll do it all again tomorrow. Bath time isn't about cleanliness. It's about transformation. You're not just a sleepy woman. You're royal potential in human form. That means you're about to be soaked, scrubbed, shaved, and polished until you resemble a sacred artifact. The bath chamber smells like someone dropped a perfumery into a citrus grove. The water's infused with lotus petals, jasmine oil, and something mysteriously labeled fragrance of divine intention. It's not so much a bath, it's a ritual. 2 attendants arrive with sponges that feel soft but judge you silently. They use natron, a gritty salt mineral, to exfoliate you, scrubbing away dead skin and any hint you were ever just a village girl. Then comes hair removal. Everything below the eyebrows must go. Waxing, plucking, shaving, take your pick. Body hair is seen as dirty, unattractive, and, worst of all, ordinary. You grit your teeth and remind yourself, queens don't complain. They sigh. Politely. Next, almond oil. It's poured on in thick layers while someone whispers compliments. You're massaged until your skin shines. And when you try to stand, you nearly slide off the floor. You're now a human candle. Now for the perfume. It isn't sprayed. It's built in layers. First, a musky base, then a citrus heart, then a floral top note. The goal? Smell like a goddess or a fruit basket attending a royal wedding. The scent will cling to you all day. If the Pharaoh sneezes as you pass, that's not hay fever. That's a tactical win. You're handed a clean linen dress, thin enough to hint, not show. And you're told to sit upright for an hour while the oils absorb. Translation: don't ruin the finish. You're now clean, not because you were dirty, but because palace standards demand it. Next up, face time. Literally. Forget inner beauty. You need to impress with cheekbones and eyeliner sharp enough to be considered weaponry. You're seated before a bronze mirror, basically the ancient version of a beauty ring light. Your makeup artist arrives, carrying a set that looks more like a painter's kit. Crushed galena, red ochre, beetle shells, tools of the trade. First, eyeliner. Black coal is applied with reverence, like it's sacred. The line must be perfect. Too thick, and you look ready for mummification. Too thin, and you resemble a junior scribe. It's a delicate dance between intrigue and intensity. You're told not to move when someone pokes your eyelid with a reed. One tear, and it's all ruined. And if you look tired, back to laundry duty. Next, lip color. Red ochre, blended with animal fat, glamour via beetle paste. Your lips must be full, but not bold. Alluring, but humble, somehow. Then, blush. Just a dusting to fake youthful energy, even though your last real sleep was during flood season. You're not allowed to look exhausted, only contemplative. An assistant steps in to shape your brows with an ivory comb. They're styled to reflect dignity and fertility, or maybe political alliance. Honestly, no one really knows anymore. More perfume, this time dabbed behind your ears and on your wrists. The spots most likely to be touched someday. You're now glowing, perfectly arranged and possibly flammable. You glance in the mirror. You look like you belong in a tomb painting, offering a lotus flower to a god, whispering, approachable but ambitious. They move toward low tables like crocodiles stalking prey, slow, silent, and silently competitive. Your plate? A few honeyed dates, 2 figs, a touch of yogurt. Just enough to keep your cheekbones intact. You eat with 3 fingers only. Forks won't be invented for another 1,000 years, and overeating is for widows and clerks. The shade begins. Your coal is so bold today, someone says sweetly. You thank her, noting her eyeliner's uneven and her earlobes mismatched. Another young woman plops beside you, loudly mentioning she was up all night practicing harp. Translation: she thinks tonight is her chance. You smile, you nibble, and let 1 fig seed sit perfectly on your lip. A statement, not a snack. Gossip swirls. Who cried during their bath? Who stole someone's perfume? Who left the astrologer's room looking hopeful? Everyone acts indifferent. No one truly is. You chew at the perfect pace. Not too fast, greedy, and not too slow, desperate. Tom wine is poured, but only a drop. Too much, and someone might accidentally inform the wrong person. The meal ends with a traditional tooth cleaning twig and a bit of natron. You look in the mirror and think, another meal, another silent war survived. You might expect a break next. A nap. Now begins the most exhausting part of your day, looking beautiful while doing nothing. Welcome to the relaxation gallery. Sounds luxurious, right? It's actually a stage designed to let others see how well you exist. We recline on embroidered cushions under soft light. No slouching. Your posture must suggest nobility, beauty, and just a hint of tasteful boredom. You're allowed hobbies if they're decorative. Here, gossip isn't just a pastime. It's a survival strategy. In fact, it might be the most important tool in a concubine's arsenal. Some women stand out with their dancing. Others rely on a well-timed smile. But the truly powerful ones, they know everything, and more crucially, they know who doesn't. You take a seat near a group threading beads. At first, the talk seems harmless. Something about a servant dropping a fruit bowl in front of the scribe. But within minutes, it shifts. Who's wearing new jewelry? Who walked out of the astrologer's room with smeared eyeliner? And who's been unusually quiet since last week's sandal fitting? Names are never spoken outright, just hints. The tall one with the strong perfume. You know, the girl who always looks like she's about to sneeze. Everyone nods. Everyone understands. The older concubines don't say much. They just listen, because real gossip isn't just entertainment. It's power. Knowing that the Pharaoh prefers honeyed wine over date wine, that's leverage. Knowing which priest his mother dislikes, that's protection. You speak carefully. Say too little and you're invisible. Say too much and suddenly you've offended the goddess Bastet and been demoted to folding ceremonial napkins. The more seasoned women even keep wax tablets, not diaries, but coded records, notes on who was jealous, who showed up late, who coughed during the harp solo, a spreadsheet of palace tension. Then there's double gossip. When someone tells you a secret, you've already heard from the person it's about. That's when the game really starts. That's palace chess. Talking about the Pharaoh directly? That's a death sentence. But talking about the other women? It's not just permitted. It's plied, expected. It's practically a civic duty. By the time an hour passes, you've learned more than in any poetry lesson, and you've made eye contact with at least 3 future rivals. Mission accomplished. You hope the queen remembers you, maybe as the girl with the calm hands, or the one who didn't flinch when applying eyeliner. Maybe, someday, a younger concubine will copy your posture without even realizing it. Maybe a servant will whisper, "She once made the Pharaoh laugh," as if that actually means something. Maybe that's all a legacy really is. A few bits of memory floating through someone else's day. But sometimes, especially when the air smells of myrrh and the moonlight hits the courtyard just right, you let yourself dream bigger. Maybe your name ends up on some forgotten scroll. Maybe, hundreds of years later, a scholar stumbles across it and wonders who you were. Maybe they say it wrong, write a paper about you, or put you in a museum with a badly lit display and a misspelled label. Even that would be something, because you were here. You outlasted your enemies. You mastered how to stand, how to lie, how to write poetry, and how to stay quiet in 5 different languages. You turned obedience into a performance. You made hope into a plan. You lived in a palace, even if it never truly belonged to you. And in a world where most women never left their village walls, you became a quiet story in the palace of kings. It's not immortality, but it's close enough. The feast is done. The music has faded. The nobles have loosened their belts and unfastened their shoes. But for the bride and groom, the most awkward and critical part of their wedding day is just getting started. In medieval Europe, marriages didn't end with a kiss. They ended with spectators, bedsheets, and, in many cases, a room full of curious in-laws. The bedding ceremony, as it was called, wasn't about love, it was about law. It turned the couple's bedroom into a courtroom and their bed into the final contract. Back then, sex wasn't private. It was political. A noble family needed heirs, and heirs required proof. So after the wedding, the bride and groom didn't get peace and quiet. They got an audience. The whole community, or at least the nosiest and most powerful members, would walk with them to their bedroom, and they wouldn't stop at the door. They came in. If you were lucky, they might just take off your shoes, raise a glass, or sing a bawdy song before leaving. If not, they'd stay long enough to watch you undress, inspect the bed, or even offer encouragement while half drunk. Some families even brought in a bishop or a midwife to check the bride before or the sheets after. Why all this? Because weddings weren't just romantic unions, they were business deals. A noble woman's virginity was seen as political currency. A nobleman's ability to consummate the marriage was a legal duty. Without that proof, the marriage could be cancelled. And without witnesses, it became one person's word against the world. No one cared if the bride was nervous or if the groom was drunk. What mattered was that someone saw, or claimed to see, them begin their new life together. And if no one did, the whole marriage might be invalid. So in that strange hour between the feast and the consummation, the couple's most personal moment became public entertainment. Their wedding night wasn't about closeness, it was about evidence, and often that evidence came with a crowd. And that was just the beginning. Once the final toast was made and the last bite of food cleared, the couple didn't walk quietly to their room. They were paraded. Family, servants, priests, and musicians would escort them to the bridal chamber in a loud, theatrical march. Respectful silence? Forget it. This was more like a chaotic performance. The groom might be half dragged by his drunken friends, blushing from wine or dread. The bride, pale and quiet, was walked by her female relatives, mostly to keep her from running or fainting. If she was noble, this was her debut as someone's property. If she was a peasant, it was still a show of obedience and modesty. Everyone had a role. And yes, there was music, but not soft violins. Think drums, flutes, and crude songs yelled in time with every step. In France, they called this noisy parade the charivari. It was a mocking celebration meant to embarrass the couple and wish them success, like medieval hazing with a holy stamp of approval. Once inside the room, the couple didn't simply close the door. They were undressed, sometimes by their own family members. The groom's friends removed his clothes. The bride was stripped down by her maids or matrons, gently or not. Every layer taken off meant something. Childhood, gone. Independence, gone. From now on, they belonged to each other. Or more realistically, to the family alliance. In some places, a priest gave a blessing over the bed, hoping it would ease the awkwardness. In others, the couple shared a drink, wine or spiced milk, a small comfort before the main event. And the witnesses, they might still be there. Some stayed behind curtains. It might sound invasive now, But in a time when almost everything about a woman's value was tied to her body, this kind of public proof was seen as necessary. Of course, it didn't always go smoothly. Some couples couldn't perform under pressure. Others didn't even like each other. In rare cases, a marriage could be annulled the very next day because the couple failed to provide evidence. That kind of failure didn't just affect them. It could spark political chaos. Entire treaties could fall apart. Families could lose their place at court. In extreme cases, people were accused of witchcraft or conspiracy simply because a bride was still a virgin. There she would wait. Because in this culture, the most sacred consummation didn't involve the husband, it involved a stranger. Welcome to the ritual of sacred marriage. In Sumerian society, marriage wasn't just a personal contract. It was a religious act. And once a year, during a festival honoring Inanna, the high priestess would choose a woman, a bride, who would take part in a very unusual ritual. She would lie in the temple, perfumed and dressed in her finest clothes. And she would wait for a visitor, not her husband, but the king or a man chosen to represent the god Dumuzi. Their union was believed to bring fertility to the land. It was thought to guarantee crops, rain, and the well-being of the entire kingdom. This was not about love. It was about survival. The act itself was called hieros gamos, sacred marriage. And while historians still debate the exact details, most agree that it involved real physical consummation. Witnesses, prayers, and even songs were often part of the event. Imagine being that woman, newly married, alone in a temple, waiting not for your husband, but for a man chosen by the gods, or at least by the priesthood. She wasn't just representing herself. She was playing the role of a goddess. Her body was no longer her own. It belonged to the ceremony, to the land, to the gods. And what about the real husband? He simply waited, because this ritual was considered more important than his own wedding night. In Mesopotamia, marriage wasn't always about two people. Sometimes it was about making sure the gods stayed happy and that the grain kept growing. Today, it might sound unthinkable, but back then, this was tradition. And tradition, especially when tied to religion and survival, is hard to question. The sacred marriage wasn't about romance. It was about ritual. It wasn't about personal desire. It was about divine duty. And for the woman at the center of it all, it meant stepping into a role larger than life and far beyond our own control. Dense, greasy, and packed with enough energy to power a horse raid at full gallop, Mongol travel food didn't melt, spoil, or crumble. You could ride for days with one tucked in your sleeve. In colder regions, warriors drank broth, made from boiled animal bones, a rich, oily stock that maintained warmth and energy during long campaigns. Combined with dried meat and fat, it created a kind of proto-stew that could be heated quickly over a fire, or with hot stones dropped into a pot of water. For longer marches, warriors sometimes mixed dried meat with water in a flask and let it steep throughout the day. By nightfall, they had a makeshift soup without needing to stop and cook. It wasn't delicious, but it worked. In emergencies, Mongol soldiers had a grim fallback. They would cut a vein in their horse's neck, drink the blood, and seal the wound. The horse lived. The rider lived. And the campaign moved on. There were no fancy sauces, no spices, no courses. Mongol warrior food wasn't meant to be enjoyed. It was meant to keep you alive while galloping across thousands of miles. And it did that job with brutal minimalist precision. When Mongols weren't raiding or riding, they settled down, at least temporarily. Cooking shifted from saddle improvisation to a more stable, if still minimalist, domestic setup inside the ger, the traditional Mongol yurt. A ger wasn't just a home. It was a movable fortress of felt and wood, designed to withstand the screaming steppe winds. Inside, space was sacredly organized. The door always faced south. The fire burned in the center, and cooking happened right above it. The kitchen consisted of a metal tripod, a few cast iron pots, and fuel, wood, dried dung, or animal fat. Mongol women typically handled food preparation. They didn't follow recipes. They followed survival. Boiling was the most common method. Meat was chopped into chunks, fat added liberally, and everything simmered in a rich broth. There were no spices, just the flavors of meat, fat, and sometimes fermented milk. Salt was precious and used sparingly. One beloved dish was budog, made by stuffing a deboned marmot or goat with hot stones, sealing it tight and letting it cook from the inside out. Primitive, but the result was tender, juicy meat infused with smoky flavor. It was messy, theatrical, and undeniably Mongol. In colder months, milk was transformed into curds, yogurt, and cheese. These were either eaten fresh or dried into hard discs that lasted months. Dried curds, called arul, were so tough they could crack a tooth, but they were nutritious, and kids gnawed on them like candy. Ger meals were communal, eaten by hand, with everyone seated on the floor. Meat was passed around, broth slurped directly from bowls, fingers licked clean. Cleanliness was pragmatic. Knives wiped on sleeves, leftovers fed to dogs or reused. Despite its simplicity, the ger kitchen was the heart of Mongol domestic life, where survival met routine, and a nomadic family could briefly feel rooted, even as the land beneath them kept shifting. For the average Mongol, food was fuel. But at the court of the Khans, food became politics, prestige, and power. The same warriors who lived off dried mutton and fermented milk transformed into patrons of grand multicultural banquets under imperial silk canopies. At the height of the Mongol Empire, especially under Kublai Khan, the kitchen evolved from campfire to culinary theater. The empire stretched from Hungary to Korea, and so did its pantry. Cooks were brought in from Persia, China, India, and beyond, each bringing regional flavors, ingredients, and methods. Mongol court feasts were a stunning contrast to the austerity of the steppe. There were roasted lambs, whole birds on spits, stuffed pastries with seasoned meat. Chinese chefs prepared dumplings and rice dishes. Persian cooks offered stews, nuts, and saffron-scented flatbreads. Indian spices, fennel, cumin, pepper, appeared thanks to Silk Road traders. Drinks flowed freely: arag, fermented mare's milk, wine from the Caucasus, Chinese rice liquors, and potent spirits called arak. Entertainers performed: singers, acrobats, even trained animals. Centerpieces included towers of cooked meat, sculpted into dragons, horses, or warriors, a symbol of abundance and imperial might. It was the fusion. The empire's expanse turned its kitchen into a diplomatic buffet, a showcase of diversity, held together by the iron stomachs of people raised on boiled fat and fermented milk. To dine with a Khan wasn't just to eat. It was to taste the empire. In the Mongol Empire, food wasn't just nourishment, it was diplomacy. A bowl of broth or shared cup of arag could speak louder than any treaty scroll. To sit and eat with a Mongol leader wasn't just hospitality, it was recognition, A ritual of loyalty, a test of mutual respect. Steppe diplomacy began with food. Foreign emissaries arriving at a Mongol camp weren't taken directly to the Khan. First, they were fed. Arag was poured, mutton broth served. The quality and order of dishes spoke volumes. How honored the guest was, whether they were friend or suspect. Refusing food, especially arag, was a diplomatic disaster. It signaled distrust, superiority, or disgust. And more than one negotiation ended prematurely because a European envoy wouldn't sip the sour, bubbling drink of the steppe. But for those who embraced the ritual, the rewards were great. Merchants who shared their own treats, dates, thin milk meant bare minimum. In the Mongol world, diplomacy began with the teeth. To survive it, you had to know when to chew, when to toast, and when to nod politely with a mouthful of boiled fat. For a nomadic people always on the move, food preservation wasn't just smart, it was life-saving. Without pantries, cellars, or markets, Mongols made their diet mobile and shelf-stable with wind, sun, salt, smoke, and practicality. The most iconic method was air drying. Meat, especially mutton or horse, was sliced thin and hung from ropes strung between yurts or saddles. The cold, dry Mongolian air did the rest. Within days, the meat became borts, the ultimate travel ration. Properly dried, borts could last for months or even years. It could be ground into powder for soup, stuffed into dumplings, or chewed like jerky. Light, compact, and nearly indestructible. Dairy was preserved too. Milk was churned into butter, clarified into fat blocks, or fermented into yogurt and sour creams. Dried curds like arul were rock-hard but nutritious. These weren't snacks, they were edible insurance policies. Fermentation was another key tool. Mare's milk became arag. Cow, goat, and sheep milk became yogurt or cream, stored in skin bags or pots. These were acidic, spoil-resistant, and probiotic, though the Mongols didn't know that. They just knew it worked. Salt curing and smoking were used when possible, especially near rivers or forests. Fish could be smoked and tied to saddles. Organ meats were boiled and stored in fat, a rustic kind of confit. Storage itself was creative. Leather bags, felt bundles, even hollowed-out animal stomachs. Saddlebags doubled as kitchen cabinets. The Mongols mastered the art of eating without stopping. It wasn't fancy, but it kept them fed, fierce, and forever mobile. Food wasn't just fuel. It was bound by ritual, superstition, and social code. What you ate, how you ate it, and with whom revealed your place in the world. Certain foods weren't taken lightly. Mongol spiritual beliefs, rooted in Tengrism, shaped how food was handled. Animals were sacred life-givers. Every part had a use. Wasting food wasn't just bad. It was spiritually dangerous. Blood was both vital and taboo. So horse blood might be drunk in emergencies. Spilling blood indoors was impure. Meat was ideally butchered outside and shared to maintain spiritual balance. The fire inside the yurt was sacred. You didn't throw bones into it, curse near it, or step over it. To do so insulted the spirits and could bring misfortune to the whole camp. Some foods were avoided entirely. Dog meat was taboo. Fish, despite being abundant, was rarely eaten. Water spirits made fishing risky. Eating fish could offend unseen forces. Leftovers were handled carefully. Bones were buried or fed to animals. Liquids weren't poured onto the ground near the yurt or into the fire. Everything, had its place because everything could offend something unseen. Hospitality was sacred. Offering food to a guest, even a stranger, was mandatory. Denying someone meat or milk, even if you had little, was shameful. Hospitality ensured survival. On the vast steppe, it could save a life during a snowstorm. In Mongol culture, every bite had meaning. Food was survival, spirit, order, honor. The Mongol Empire eventually crumbled, but its foodways galloped beyond the steppe, leaving traces in cuisines from Eastern Europe to China, from the Middle East to Siberia. As the empire expanded, so did its recipes and values. Simple, practical, mobile, and meat-centered. Dumplings, for instance. Buz in Mongolia, Manti in Central Asia, pelmeni in Russia, baozi in China. All variations of meat wrapped in dough. Easy to make, easy to carry. Likely spread and adapted under Mongol influence. Fermented dairy left its mark too. Sour milk drinks like kefir in the Caucasus or ayran in Turkey echo Mongol milk preservation. Even today, travelers in Central Asia still drink arag's pungent cousins. Meat-heavy stews and skewers, from Uyghur kebabs to Siberian game soups, carry flavors of the Mongol hearth. Minimal spices, lots of fat, few grains. These are steppe signatures. Even Persian cello kebab may have roots in Mongol times, when meat on a stick became imperial fare. In China, the Yuan dynasty opened court kitchens to foreign flavors. Recipes from Persia, India, and the steppes were recorded. Mongol feasts influenced Ming-era cuisine and laid groundwork for hot pot culture. But the most lasting legacy, the idea that food is power. The Mongols showed the world that feeding warriors, guests, and enemies could shape empires. They proved that a man living on borts and fermented milk could conquer kingdoms. Today, the food of the Mongol Empire lives on, in the tang of yogurt, the stretch of dumpling dough, the sizzle of lamb over coals. You just have to know where to look and be brave enough to take a bite. The European envoys sat stiffly at the grand Mongol banquet, their expressions tightening as a sour, bubbling drink was placed before them. The fermented mare's milk, known as arag, was a Mongol staple, a symbol of hospitality and respect. But to the Europeans, it was too foreign, too strange. They politely declined to sip, and with that simple refusal, the diplomatic talks fell apart. In the Mongol world, sharing a meal wasn't just about food, it was a test of trust. Those who embraced Mongol customs found doors opening. Traders who brought delicacies like Persian dried fruits, Baghdad dates, or Armenian wines were often welcomed with open arms. They weren't just tolerated, they were protected and rewarded with special trading privileges. The Mongols loved trying new things, but they expected visitors to approach with respect. Grand feasts weren't just celebrations, they were political tools. Alliances were solidified, marriages honored, and military deals made over steaming bowls of dumplings and platters of lamb ribs. Guests were expected to eat heartily. It wasn't just polite, it showed strength. Could you handle the reality of Mongol rule? Could you eat like one of them? Even the food itself was part of the diplomacy. A prized shoulder cut of meat meant high honor. A rump slice, a subtle hint. You're not that important. A bowl of rich broth showed esteem. Thin milk, just the basics. In this world, diplomacy began not with words, but with your teeth. Success meant knowing when to chew, when to toast, and when to smile through a mouthful of boiled fat. For nomads who never stayed in one place, preserving food wasn't just smart, it was survival. With no markets or pantries, They turned their meals into mobile, long-lasting rations. All they had was wind, sun, salt, smoke, and know-how. The star of their preservation methods was air drying. Strips of meat, usually mutton or horse, were hung between yurts or across saddles. The cold steppe air turned them into borts, a protein-rich food that could last months or even years. Ground into powder, borts could become soup, dumpling filling, or simply be gnawed on like jerky. Lightweight, compact, and nearly indestructible, it fueled Mongol warriors across vast distances. For nomads who never stayed in one place, preserving food wasn't just smart, it was survival. With no markets or pantries, they turned their meals into mobile, long-lasting rations. All they had was wind, sun, salt, smoke, and know-how. The star of their preservation methods was air drying. Strips of meat, usually mutton or horse, were hung between yurts or across saddles. The cold steppe air turned them into borts, a protein-rich food that could last months or even years. Ground into powder, borts could become soup, dumpling filling, or simply be gnawed on like jerky. Lightweight, compact, and nearly indestructible, it fueled Mongol warriors across vast distances. The Mongols had perfected a way of eating that let them move constantly and still stay strong. Their food wasn't fancy, but it was reliable, nutritious, and built for motion. Yet food wasn't only about eating. It was wrapped in ritual, beliefs, and social expectations. What you ate, how you ate, and who you ate with all spoke volumes. Their spiritual beliefs, rooted in Tengrism, the ancient steppe religion, shaped every bite. Animals weren't just meat. They were sacred providers. Every part had meaning. And wasting food was more than careless. It was spiritually dangerous. Blood, for example, was sacred and taboo. In emergencies, horse blood might be drunk. But spilling blood inside, especially during cooking, was forbidden. Butchering had to be done outdoors and with respect. The cooking fire inside the yurt was sacred. You never cursed near it, tossed bones into it, or stepped over it. Doing so was believed to anger spirits and bring harm to the entire camp. Certain foods were avoided completely. Dog meat, eaten by some neighbors, was shunned by the Mongols. Fish, despite being available, was rarely eaten. Water was sacred, a home to spirits. Fishing was seen as disruptive, and eating fish risked drawing spiritual wrath. Even leftovers were treated with care. Bones were buried or fed to animals. Liquids weren't dumped near the yurt or into the fire. Every bit of food was handled with respect, because even invisible things could be offended. And then there was hospitality. In the Mongol world, feeding guests was practically sacred. Whether friend or stranger, you were offered food, meat, milk, whatever was available. Refusing to share wasn't just impolite, it was shameful. On the steppe, hospitality could mean the difference between survival and death during a snowstorm. Every bite had meaning. Food wasn't just nutrition, it was spirit, social order, and a form of diplomacy. ...